All right, Rick, thank you for coming.
You're welcome. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I appreciate it. I know you have a great story, almost 30 years or over 30 years,
Yeah,
right?
31 years.
31 years. Wow. Okay. Are you okay with telling us which department that you work for?
Yeah, I work for the city of Richmond, Richmond Fire Department
Okay.
in the Bay Area.
Awesome. And you retired as
I retired as a fire captain in December of 2021.
nice. Okay. So, yeah, I just want to talk about your story. So, if you can, maybe just kind of explain to us, what was it like growing up?
Well, I grew up, born and raised in Oakland. I was the youngest of five. Both my parents worked. My dad was a steel worker. My mom worked for the telephone company. Had a great childhood growing up in East Oakland. Born and raised in the East Bay. Lived my whole life here. Going to A's games as a little kid. And just ran around all of East Oakland. We used to ride to the zoo, go to the zoo a lot, and do a bunch of different stuff like that. Had a great childhood here in Oakland. Went to high school in San Lorenzo. When my oldest sister moved out to San Lorenzo, she asked me to go to school out there. I was a St. Liz kid, first through eighth grade, and then went to San Lorenzo High and graduated from San Lorenzo High, and joined the United States Army. Did 4 years in the Army. Came out, got a job as a warehouseman, and after about a year and a half, I figured, well, this is not what I want to do for the rest of my life. Uh, so I was trying to figure out where my career path was. Spoke to my brother-in-law, and he said, "You know what? I have a friend that's a fire captain in Union City. I wish I would have applied with them. Why don't you go talk to him?" So I called him up. He invited me over to the firehouse. I stayed about 3 hours. We talked about the fire service as a career. I think the next day I went to Chabot and signed up for science classes.
Wow. What year was this?
This would have been in mid or late 86.
86. Okay. And real quick, I'm going to back you up. How many brothers and sisters do you have?
So I have three sisters and one brother.
Okay.
The three sisters are the first born, one, two, three. My brother, then 5 years later, I was born.
So you're the baby.
I'm the baby.
The baby. Okay. All right. So you go and spend time at this firehouse. What was that like for you?
Uh, I had no expectations, so it was kind of eye opening. We talked, he told me about how they did a bunch of medical work. 80% of what they did was medical responses. Union City was a busy city back then. They ran a lot of fires. And he was just a great storyteller. This guy, he was a captain for probably 8 or 10 years. And just the stories he told got me so hyped. And it reminded me of the fire or the military, the camaraderie, the family, how everything worked together. And it was something that I felt just fit naturally for me.
Yeah. I noticed that camaraderie a lot. Being in law enforcement, we come across fire department, on a daily basis. And you can see that camaraderie is very close knit between you guys. So I know you said you did go to the army as well, right? How long did you do in the army?
I did 4 years in the Army, 2 years in Nuremberg, Germany, and then 2 years 101st Airborne in Fort Campbell, Kentucky.
Wow. Okay. What was that like?
That was a great way to become a man. It was I joined the service when I was 18, came out when I was 22, and teach you to be responsible for your own actions. I enjoyed it very much. It wasn't something I wanted to do for a career, but it was a great fill in my life, and I learned so much about people and responsibility in life in the service. It was a very rewarding career.
Wow. Okay. And then we can go back to the firehouse. So did that kind of get you on the path of saying, okay, this is something that I might want to do?
Yeah, it did. It would. I went to Chabot, like I said, and signed up for fire science classes, and took the first class. And I had a battalion chief from Foster City was the instructor, and he was very welcoming and open to fire service. There were several people. What do you have? 50 people in the class, and a lot of us were just experiencing this for the first time. So, back then that was before cell phones, and uh, you know, I think we had pagers at the most back
Yeah.
then. So communicating with people wasn't as easy as it is now. Networking was really a different thing way back then. So you met people as you started to take exams, and you'd find your group of guys to go from test to test to test to apply. So it was quite an experience.
Yeah, I bet. So again, you're how old at this time?
I just turned 60.
I'm sorry, at the time that you went to the firehouse, went to
I
college,
was 22
22.
or
Okay,
23 actually.
okay. So tell me the journey that you went from there. I mean, obviously you didn't stop there. So
No, once I went to Jabot and got in fire science, they had a workers work experience program where you can go to Oakland Fire and volunteer. And I was one of the guys that went to Oakland Fire, volunteered and did ride-alongs over there, which do a night shift. And that was before, I think a year. I did that for 4 years off and on. It took me quite a while to get hired, but during that time was the Lone Prieta earthquake. So I
oh
was
yeah,
able to go down and volunteer at the Cypress and take air bottles and backfill at the fire stations because all the guys were kind of tied up with the collapse of the Cypress.
so you got to see kind of the havoc that came with that big earthquake then.
Yeah, really early in my career, I guess you could say.
Wow. So what was that like? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
You know, that was eye opening. The Bay Area had never experienced anything like that, and you had, San Francisco had the marina on fire, Oakland had the Cypress collapse, and they were trying to get people out of there for several days, and it was you could see the exhaust and the trauma all in one picture. It was something that I'll never forget.
Yeah. So did seeing that deter you in any way, or did that make you feel more like this was the thing that you wanted to do with the rest of your life?
No, it just helped reinforce what I wanted to do. I was a person of service. My parents, were very involved in the community and in the church. So for me, it was a really natural process to always want to serve and help the community out. So that just reinforced my goals.
Got it. Okay. And then from there, what happened from there? How long was that process of you getting to know kind of the job?
Well, it took almost 4 years for me to get hired. And it was, I went through Chabot's program, went through the Firefighter One Academy, became an EMT. I was bilingual. I was taking the exams. I was scoring really well, but I just wasn't getting hired. It was probably took me 4 years to get hired. I'd gotten married the year before I got hired. So after about a year of being married, you start to question, is this going to work out for me?
Yeah.
And at that point, when I was kind of contemplating my future, I got I got an offer from Richmond, then Oakland, then Hayward. And Richmond offered me the position first. And I told all three, whoever was first was the position I would take. And I got hired for Richmond as a provisional, had to reapply a year later. And then almost got laid off my first year there.
Wow.
So the first 2 years there were quite an experience.
So what year was that?
And that was in 91.
91. So you started in 91 and explain what's provisional.
So we got hired in February of 91, and they hired us as provisionals because the day that they actually offered us the job, the list had expired the day before. So they couldn't offer us a position because, as all cities do, they just, can't get it together sometimes, for a lack of a better term. So they hired us as provisionals, put us through the academy. We got online. Then we had to reapply for the position.
Okay. So obviously stressful, right? You said you got married, and now you're at this point you're trying to provide for your wife now, and probably a family coming soon, and all that stuff. So what was that like? What was that stress like?
That was super stressful. I was probably 2 months into the academy when my wife got rear-ended by a drunk driver.
Oh wow.
And so she was out of work for like 6 months, and I was still in the middle of the academy where I couldn't take time off. And so luckily we had a great support group with my mother-in-law, and just our family, taking care of her while she was home, unable to move.
Wow. And what was she doing? What kind of work?
She worked for a chiropractor at that time. She was office manager for a chiropractic office.
Okay. And what were the extent of her injuries during that accident?
She was at a stoplight, and the drunk driver ran into her at about 45 miles an hour.
Oh wow.
And folded the back seat of her car. She had a little Nissan Pulsar, so she had severe back problems and neck problems, so it was hard for her to move around.
Yeah. Wow. So, okay, so you're obviously stressing over this, and I know you mentioned that you almost got laid off also. So, when did you move from provisional to actually full time hired?
So there was a 6 month window, I guess you could be provisional. So the city had to have the exams. So when we had the second set of exams, 4,000 people applied, and they hired seven of us.
Wow. Okay.
So, and I was one of the rehires. And if you'd have made a mistake at any time in that exam process, you were out of a job. So you had to go through the whole process again: the written, the physical agility, and the multiple interviews.
Wow. So you get out of the 4,000, you're one of the seven that gets on, and then when you get on, what does day one look like for a firefighter?
Well, we were already out of the academy and we were back in the firehouse. So once you come out of the academy and you come into your firehouse, they split everybody in the academy up and they kind of spread them around. And that's about learning to become part of a new family. It's quite stressful because your training really helps you get through a lot of this, but training only gets you so far because you have guys. When I came on, there were still a lot of Vietnam vets with a ton of experience, and Richmond was a city that burned quite a bit. So that says that we had a lot of fires. We were, this is the early '90s. The crack epidemic was going on. A year later, Rodney King event was happening. So those early years were very, very, very busy.
Did you guys see the wake of that riots and stuff from Rodney King?
Yeah, that week after, they were lighting dumpsters in courtyards, and we'd go put a dumpster out. We get pelted with rocks.
Wow.
I remember driving down one of the streets, and I was sitting in the firefighter's seat behind the captain, and somebody threw a boulder from an apartment complex and landed literally about 4 inches from my head and hit the side of the fire engine as we were driving down the street. So that month after Rodney King was pretty stressful.
Yeah, it seemed like havoc kind of ensued everywhere at that time. So during that time, you're brand new, right?
Yes.
So not only is it a FTO kind of process also like we have in law enforcement, or is it a different type?
No, they when you first come out of the academy, they'll put you with a seasoned firefighter, and he'll make sure that you understand, how your role works. So when you first start, there's housework. You got to check first. You come in early. You check your apparatus, all your safety equipment, make sure everything's good on the fire engine or the rescue or whatever piece of equipment you're assigned to. And then you do your housework, and then it goes into training, and you're just working and reading. You have exams every month. A big exam halfway through your probation and another one at the end of the probation. So you're studying and training and going over the equipment just never stops.
Got it. And is there hazing or anything like that in the firehouse?
Well, when I came in the '90s, there was a lot of hazing. It was a different era, right? So you kind of just had to deal with it and move on. You couldn't get away with the stuff today that we got away with 31 years ago.
Can you talk about any of that?
Yeah, you could be. I remember going to a multiple shooting, like 2 o'clock in the morning, and I'm putting the medical bags back in the fire engine. And as soon as I closed the cabinet, the fire engine drove away. It was 2 o'clock in the morning. Yellow tape, barrier tape still up for the shooting. They're still looking for suspects, and I'm out there in the middle, having to walk back to the firehouse.
Oh man, how far is that walk?
It was probably about a little less than a mile.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
And which firehouse were you with at this time?
Back then I was at Station 7 on Cutting Boulevard, and we were responding from Easter Hill, which was an area that was known for its violence at that time.
Yeah, still is, I think.
Well, they renamed it now. It was right off Cutting Boulevard. So yeah, they had renamed it and changed up. Took out all the old World War II buildings and put new apartments up there.
Yeah, so they still have Easter Hill. They still have Central Richmond. They still have North Richmond. All those. Did you guys go all over for Richmond?
So the city was divided up into seven. There were 7 stations. So the city was kind of divided up for the stations. So we ran most of the Iron Triangle back then, which was the lower part of Richmond, or the south side of Richmond, I guess you'd say. And it was pretty busy. As a young firefighter, it was fun because you weren't bored. You were running all the time, a lot of calls.
I would imagine there's no way to be bored in a city like Richmond.
No, especially when you're a young guy and you're working in the downtown area and you're working north or the south side or, Bayview or even Hilltop. Everything's gotten so it's very busy now.
Yeah. So how long is that training process?
It was an 18-month probational process.
Okay. So 18 months is the probation, or is that just straight training, or is that both?
Well, that's both. That's your probation. So while you're on probation, you're always being supervised. You get back then they would keep us with one captain for 9 months, then rotate us to another shift and another captain for the second 9 months. Now they do it every month or every 3 months, and every city's probationary period is different, right? That's the way Richmond did it. But back then it was all city departments. Now you have county departments, right? So you have Contra Costa County, Alameda County. These are much larger departments, so their probationary standards are way different than a city like Richmond would be.
Got it. So you started obviously a lot sooner than I started law enforcement, but when I went through my FTO phase was kind of rough. Like I had to deal with some training officers that were tough on me. Is that kind of the same thing with you guys?
Yeah, we really got pushed through the academy, so we had some very tough training instructors. I remember one day we were in the academy, and it was, Richmond's on the bay, so it doesn't get hot very often. And it was one of these days it was over 100 degrees, and we were doing what one of the captains developed this thing called the Firefighter Olympics. And we had to carry 2 5-gallon barrels of foam around the train tower, do a dummy drag, drag hose, pull hose up to the 3rd-story building, swing an axe 100 times onto this big log. And it was nonstop. It was a continuous event.
Wow.
And so he'd line us up, and we'd go. And I remember coming back after the event and saying, "Hey, Captain, can I get a drink of water?" And he went to F you, get your ass in the front of the line and do it again.
Wow.
And that's kind of how the academy went. I mean, they'd overpressure the hose lines until we all fell over, till we drug stuff, and they would just beat you and beat you and beat you. And the academy was difficult. It was, you had the good cop, bad cop, so you'd have one captain that was really, really tough on you. The other one would come and stroke you and say, "Hey, let's do it this way, let's go this," teach you more technique.
Okay.
And it was that yin and yang in an academy.
Okay.
So by the time you got to the line, you were dealing with individuals and their attitudes, right? Because you're dealing with 3 people versus.
Yeah. So you had different captains throughout training?
Through the training process, yeah, there were 4 captains, or 2 captains and two firefighters that were the assistants. So 2 would be on one day, then the next day the other 2 would rotate, and they would keep rotating like that, and that went on for 3 months.
Got it. I don't want to jump too far ahead, but I do want to ask, at that time, were you thinking like, just goal wise, were you thinking, okay, someday I'm going to be a captain? Or at that time, were you just like, just get me off the training?
No, and I already had military experience. I'd been through boot camp and stuff like that. So as hard as that was, it was something I knew had to be done. I really hadn't thought much about the future. It was just getting through and doing the best I could through the academy. At that point, you just want to make sure you have a job when you get through.
Yeah.
So it was really important that you maintain the standard above 90%.
Yeah. And you're getting paid at this time, right?
Yeah. And back then we were getting paid normal pay. Now they do a training pay. So they've changed the way that they do that now. But back then we had it wasn't a full payment. You had like a half payment till you're out of the academy. Then you got your regular payment.
Got it. Okay, so you get past that 18 months probation period, and do things change? I know from my perspective in law enforcement, when I was on training, it was like nobody wanted to talk to me. Nobody wanted to help me with anything. Nobody wanted to, the only person I was supposed to even talk to or associate with was my FTO. And it was like, you ask him everything. But once I got off FTO, it was like everybody just kind of opened their arms up and like, "Hey, I'm going to help you. I'm here to help you." You were on the team now. Yeah. Is that kind of what it was like for you? Yeah,
about halfway through your probation, people started developing opinions on you. So, it's the fires. I don't want to say as individuals are judgmental, but as soon as you come online, people are judging you. They're, how strong are you? How well do you take a joke? Are you going to crumble at a fire? Mm-hmm. There's lots of things going on, and really you're going from 0 to 100 right away, right? So you have to be able to change your mindset in a moment's notice. right? You could be joking around at the firehouse or doing cleaning toilets. Next thing you know, you have a structure fire or a car accident or somebody's having a heart attack or delivering a baby. It really goes from 0 to 100 right now.
Yeah. Wow. So do you remember what it was like the minute you didn't have somebody leading you? What was that like for the first time you went to a fire or a call or something?
Well, it was freeing, right? Because I remember going to a church fire on McDonald Avenue, and it was an old movie theater they turned into a church, and we had fire coming out of the roof, and I took my I was first engine in, and we had a hose line went through one of the doors on the left. As soon as I put my hand on the wall, I was getting shocked. Power was running through the whole building, and so you're asking everybody, hey, shut off the electricity. Well, they're all like, the electricity is awful. I'm still getting shocked over here, and you're standing in water puddles,
Yeah.
and but you still have the freedom to be able to, okay, let me figure this out, pull it out with, and not have a captain standing right behind you, kind of guiding every thought you had, right? And I was very fortunate to have really good captains as a young firefighter that wanted you to figure it out, wanted you to learn. They didn't micromanage, which was really great for my whole career.
Yeah, I mean, just what you're explaining right now, it sounds like you really don't have you're not afforded that, that opportunity, I guess you could say, to make a mistake, really, right?
Right.
Mistakes is what hurts people, right?
Well, yeah, and you're when you go to a fire, you're going with a minimum of 12 other people, right? So one mistake that you make could jeopardize the life of any other of the firefighters responding.
Uh, and have you ever went to a fire where something similar to that happened, where you've seen that, one thing kind of snowballed into something else?
Sure, I've seen people open doors on the windward side of something and blow fire through a house. When you fight fire, you fight from the uninvolved to the involved. That's how when we came on, that's how we fought. Science has kind of changed over the years on how you fight fires, but there's doors and windows that you open and doors and windows that you don't open because they could push the fire through a building. So if somebody's not paying attention and communication isn't working well because radios are down or somebody's doing something on their own, it's really easy to hurt somebody else on that fire scene.
Can you explain a little bit about that? I don't want you to get into the whole fire science of it, but what do you mean by there's doors you can and can't open?
When you're attacking a fire, you're kind of compartmentalizing the fire, right? So if I go to a single family dwelling that's on fire and I have a bedroom in the back that's on fire, and I'm going in to fight that fire, and I'm coming in through the front door. Well, if somebody opens another door or window and the wind's coming through that direction, that fire can easily go from a 1-bedroom fire to a 3-bedroom fire, or it could push it upstairs.
Wow.
There were fires that I fought with heavy, because Richmond, you're on the edge of the bay, so there's times you get really heavy winds. Yeah. And if somebody opens a slider as you're coming through the front door and the stairwells by the slider, that fire and that wind's going right up the stairwell, right? So now you have a chimney effect, and you can push fire through a building if it's not coordinated, if the fire attack itself is not coordinated.
Wow. All right. So I know people are going to want to know this. Can you recall the first time you had to actually save someone from a fire or something like that?
It's funny because it's a team effort. And I remember one of my first fires, my academy brother they were actually first in on the fire engine, and they had a jumper. The guy jumped out of the second story because the house was on fire. So I got to be the first in on the nozzle and went up to put the fire. We found a second person upstairs that we were able to drag out. We knocked down the fire and we were able to pull that person out. It seemed like almost every fire we had for my first few years, we were pulling somebody out of a building.
Wow. So it's just
another
day at the office.
Yeah, it was another day at the office. It was not something that you overthought about. It's like it wasn't. You really didn't even think about it as a rescue. Most of the time, it was like, hey, let's get a nozzle on that fire. Let somebody else is doing a primary search. It always kind of goes, however you show up to the fire scene. You have 4 engines that are showing up. The first guy does rescue. Second person does the hose stream. And the third engine comes behind you with the second hose stream. And anybody at any time can find a victim within the building.
Yeah, so I watch like everybody else. I'm sure I watch the news, and you see these firefighters going up into the third floor, pulling people out of the window, and coming down and doing all that. And we're like, holy shit, that was badass. But then you're watching it like, man, I did that 3 times last week.
Yeah.
you know?
Well, yeah, and there's, I mean, I can recall fires of other people just dragging people down the ladders, and that was the only way out because you couldn't get down the stairs. There was
Yeah.
still fire on the first floor.
Wow. Wow. So explain a little bit about some of those instances that you went to where it was hectic. I mean, you ever had a oh shit moment where like, oh, I might not make it home?
Uh, Several of those. I mean, I remember once there was this was just well, I shouldn't say just. We were coming back from another medical call, and we had a child that got ran over in his big wheel, and he was the car was still on top of the big wheel and the child, and the driver had came out and saw the kid underneath, went back in his car and grabbed his bottle of vodka and threw it in the trunk. Well, the neighbors that saw that, so when we came around the corner to the call, because we just happened to be right around the corners, the whole neighborhood was just beating the crap out of this driver. They were just pummeling him, stroking him right there in front of the car. The kid was still underneath the car. So I went to get to the kid. My engineer was trying to get the crowd back. The mother had just hadn't known what happened, came out and jumped on my back and started swinging at me while I'm trying to pull the kid out from underneath the car. And it was one of those oh shit moments, and this was shortly after Rodney King too. So it was kind of, are we going to get out of here? And then luckily another fire engine showed up and the police officer showed up. We were able to get I think he was like 3 years old, get the child out from underneath the car. Wow. And he didn't make it. You know what I mean? It was one of those moments where, holy crap, this could have gone a whole different way.
Yeah. So they were not concerned about the child?
No, and I don't know. Yeah, it was kind of a trip because eventually I had several people help me lift the front of the car open to drag the big wheel out. But it took, what felt like 20 minutes. So I'm sure it was maybe 10. But they were more concerned on, the driver and his stupidity versus pulling the kid out of the car.
Wow. So that's, I mean, I would imagine you unfortunately have seen too many children not make it.
Yeah.
That's gotta be tough.
One of my first Christmas Eve working there, SIDS was pretty big back then, where sudden infant death syndrome for children under 6 months.
Yeah.
And I went to my first SIDS case on Christmas Eve morning, or I guess it would have been early Christmas morning. And, a 4-month-old baby that there was nothing you can do that had already passed away. And, there was a lot of child deaths. And at that point we were trying to have kids. So all those things kind of really, you hold dear to you, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, obviously, no, I have kids now, but, at that time you didn't have kids, but it's something traumatic because, you're going to eventually have kids and, you see things like this happen and it kind of, it sticks with you it definitely sticks with you.
Yeah, I was able to pretty much, that type of a career, you really have to let a lot of things go, because if you held on to every call you went on to and try to memorize it or remember it, and those things that's what starts the PTSD, right? And so back then there was no counseling, there was no way to deal with that. You dealt with that within your other firefighters. You'd go back to the firehouse, you'd talk about it, or you'd even joke about it because that was a way to get through it. Yeah. It wasn't something.
It's something to be said about what you just mentioned. You joke about it, and people hear that and they take it. They take it off. They take it wrong because they don't understand that that's almost a necessary thing for. I think for us as well. I've seen too many deaths in my career, and I've had not even half the time that you've had as in law enforcement. So when you see things like that, you have to find levity in different situations like that in order to kind of control, alt, delete, I guess you can say. Yeah.
Well, it's a long career, and it takes a special personality to be able to survive something like that. That's not a simple task. Right now I think with the pandemic, talking about anxieties and all these different things have really changed the way people see I don't want to say mental illness, but just stress in itself, and the way that you deal with these, PTSD from soldiers going back and forth to, to these last battles that we've had, or wars, it's really changed the way that people are dealing with first responders. And it's a great thing. We never had that before, but the only way to deal with that with levity, or you couldn't have survived a 30-year career.
Yeah. Yeah. So in that 30 years, I don't want to jump ahead again, but in those 30 years, do you feel like you kept any of those calls with you, or were you able to, like you said, kind of do that control alt delete and move on? Know that I have my job here and this is my life here. I gotta separate the two.
It's difficult because you try to forget, and I've been able to forget most of them. And I think it really helped the fact that I didn't work and live in the same city. When I left work, I was able to leave work. I could go home and I could deal with my family, deal with the kids when they were growing up, do all these different things. Guys that kind of live in the city that they work are always kind of drugged back into it. And it's harder for them to, really forget these things because they're dealing with their neighbors. Where I left, I was still involved in the community and doing a lot of things you know, for the community, but I was able to leave that behind. So, now I remember more of the things that tied me to my kids, right? I remember my son being 13 and going to a 13-year-old that was shot. I remember my daughter going to her first football game in high school, and I responded to a shooting at the football game where a girl was shot in the back and paralyzed. So these are things that I still kind of remember, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Especially when it involves your kids.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a whole different story. One thing, and I won't touch on it too long, but I had an experience outside of work where I was able to help a lady with her baby that was choking, right? And it was a completely different experience from me being at work. I've done that at work prior, maybe, I don't know, maybe 2 or 3 times prior to that. And it wasn't the same thing as being off, because I had my kids watching me do this too.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, I can't fail. And if I do something wrong, I don't want to get in trouble, So it was definitely a different experience.
Right, because you think of your liabilities, you think of all these kind of things that go with it, but that's who you are. This is who, you chose to be a fire. Nobody made you become a police officer or a firefighter. So when you choose these careers, you choose a life of service, and it doesn't matter where you're at, on or off duty. That's what you do.
Yeah, I agree. Have you ever had to handle anything or deal with anything off duty?
Uh, I was at Black Angus 20 something years ago, and a guy next to me was choking and stopped breathing. So I went over there to help and start CPR. And all the Black Angus people just shoved me to the side and pushed. They wouldn't let me touch him. I was like, you're a patron. You can't do this. We're all trained in CPR. And I was like, I'm trying to explain to them, and I couldn't even get close to the guy. So it's like, I better get out of here before somebody sees me.
Yeah.
And but I've been very fortunate. I've had minor accidents. We've been camping. I've had a friend that sliced his leg open jumping out of the back of a truck, and we wrapped it up. I've had different things off the job, but nothing really too serious.
Got it. Okay. And you said you have kids. How many kids do you have?
I have 2 children, one 30 and one 18.
Okay. And 30-year-old. So what's he doing?
He's actually a firefighter for National City.
So awesome. He followed in Dad's footsteps. All right. So a little bit more. I know people are going to want to know this. Can you explain or tell us about some, crazy, like, oh my God, I can't believe that just happened moment at your job?
Oh yeah, there was I remember going to an apartment fire at midnight, and it was dark, and we had a fire blowing through. I was on the truck at that time. We had fire blowing through the roof, and we had to throw a 35-foot extension ladder to the top to cut a hole. And even though fire was going through, you have to go up there and cut a hole. You got to stop the fire from running the attic and save part of the building. So I remember having to extend this 35-foot ladder, and we couldn't get close to the building. So we extended it probably 20 feet away and had to kind of guesstimate how tall to extend the ladder and then drop it in the building. Because if you miss the building, you can go through a window, all these different things can happen, right? And then you can also push the fire around. We got the ladder up there. It was just perfect. We got the ladder up there. We got up there with a chainsaw, cut a trench over the top of the roof, and we were able to stop the fire from advancing in the attic. And it was one of those, oh shit, if we'd have hesitated at any step there, we could have lost this whole building. There were still people sleeping in the building. It was kind of one of those crazy moments,
Wow.
right?
So I remember you told me a story. I don't know if you remember this at all, but you told me a crazy story where you went to a shooting. I believe it was maybe gang involved shooting, and you were trying to save somebody with a gunshot wound, and then somebody threatened you and said, "If you save him, I'm going to kill you." Is it?
Yeah, and that happened quite a bit in North Richmond during that time. I was, we would go to a shooting. I couldn't even tell you how many shootings I've been to. It was pretty rampant there. Richmond was the number one homicide city in the state. It would bounce back between Compton, Richmond, East Palo Alto. And it seemed like for 5 years, it would rotate which city would have the most homicides.
Wow.
And I remember several times I don't want you helping that guy. And it would be somebody in the crowd that you would think was an innocent bystander. And they would say, don't touch him. He's a gang member of this gang or that gang, or,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? So it was like, you still had to deal with it. And it was kind of that thing that you had to, I got to help them. This is my job, and I can't just walk away and hope that they would understand,
So how do you get through that? I mean, do you recall any of those situations happening? I mean, are you just continuing doing what you're supposed to do?
Yeah, well, you have no choice. You can't really walk away. I mean, there's times that we would stage outside if we knew that it was going to be a gang-related situation until PD had secured the scene, and then we'd go in. But early in our career, it wasn't like that. You would end up on scene, and there'd still be shooters around, and there'd still be a lot of things going on. So you really had to be street smart and hope that you had the right crew with you that could talk to somebody and say, hey, man, we're just here because this is our job. We got to do it. And so you would have, if I was a firefighter, it was my job for patient contact and do the emergency services part, or my captain, my engineer might be able to talk to somebody in the crowd. And especially if they were local people, it was easy. If they grew up in Richmond, it was easier for them to talk to somebody and say, hey, man, we're just here to help. It's not, just let him do his job, and it would work out. So we were very fortunate that it always worked out for us.
Yeah. So you ever find yourself, or anybody in your crew ever find themselves actually physically fighting with anybody on scene?
Oh yeah, the back of an ambulance. We found, I remember once we went to a call, and it was in the Hilltop area, and it was I'm bilingual, and it was another Mexican dude that spoke English and Spanish, and he was having a mental breakdown. But I got him all calm, we're walking out of the place, and he just starts freaking out. And luckily there was a cop on scene, so the cop says, hey, let go. I got to tase him, and tasers were pretty new. And the firefighter with me didn't hear him and didn't let go. So when the cop tased the guy, my partner got tased as well, and I could see him on the side shaking. And we laughed about that for years, but it was like, it's kind of how things worked.
Wow. So I'm going to bring up another story. I don't know if you remember this one as well. You told me briefly about it. The cat incident. Do you remember that?
Well, like the cat in the tree. I mean, there was several cat incidents. I'm not sure.
So you went to a house where a guy was kind of doing something he probably shouldn't have been doing with his cat.
No, I don't remember
You
that
don't remember
one.
that?
I don't remember that one at all.
All right, that was a long time ago that I heard about it, so we won't talk about that. You get PETA to cancel my show.
Yeah, there's a lot of strange calls and people doing weird things with animals all the time.
Wow. All right, so I know outside of work, you did have a close near-death experience that you dealt with. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, it was 2001. We were camping, and I got in a wave runner accident. And we're still not sure what happened. Me and my buddy were out in wave runners. I saw him go left. I went right. And he came out of a turn and saw my ski empty. And kind of hit the front of the ski. And then came up and saw my scalp was ripped wide open. There were two teenagers in an aluminum boat right there, and they bailed. So I'm not sure if I got in an accident with the guys in the aluminum boat or if he hit me and it ripped my skull open. But they flew me out. Luckily, I was in Trinity. They had an airport there, which is in Northern California. They flew me to Redding and performed surgery on me, and my eye was sunk back about 1/8 of an inch. So it was a while before I can get back to work. And the guys at work covered my shifts. When I woke up, I saw fellow firefighters sitting in the room waiting for me to see if I recovered. It was quite a
So you were unconscious at that time when you got hit, or you don't even remember at
I
all?
was wide awake. They said I was talking. They took me in the ambulance,
Wow.
and when I got there, but I don't recall any of it. The last thing I recall is actually looking to the left, and seeing my friend doing donuts going to the left. And even though I wasn't passed out, just the way the body reacts in the brain shut all that off.
Wow. And so, what was the extent of the injuries?
Broken orbital fractures were mainly the main thing, and I got like basically scalped. Half my scalp came off, and they sewed it back. 6 months later, I went back to surgery. They cut me from ear to ear, flapped my face down, rearranged my orbital socket, pulled my eye back out a little bit. I lost a little bit of vision. I have a blown pupil, but I was able to go back to work.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's
The
amazing.
chief had called my wife actually while I was still in the emergency room and said, whatever you need, we're here for you. And it was a relief to know that the chief's wife called my wife. It was a very touching moment at that time that there was just so much support.
Yeah, I can imagine. No brain injury, nothing like
No,
that.
no, I was very fortunate. Lost a little bit of vision, and that was about it.
Wow. And what was the recovery like?
I was off for 3 months originally, and then the guys at work were very supportive. I went back to work, struggled a little bit with my vision. Then I had my second surgery, and I was off for another 3 months after that, and then came back and been working ever since. So yeah, I was pretty lucky.
Wow, that's crazy. So 6 months from an injury like that.
Yeah.
So go back to work. Is it business as usual? I mean, just dealing with the same thing, or what was the progression like for you to be promoted?
So I was very fortunate. You know, when I got hired, there was no other group behind us for 5 years. So we were the rookies for 5 years. So we got a lot of the go to this station, go to that station. A lot of you just got a lot of the bullshit work for until the next academy comes in. Everything kind of falls on you. And having the military background really helped me excel. And I was taking a lot of classes. I finished my probation and started acting as an engineer, then acting as a captain, and taking all these classes out of the city of Richmond. I would go to Sacramento. I'd go to, San Jose, anywhere in the Bay Area that was offering different classes on whether it was being a or apparatus operator, or for a captain. And the first exam that came up was 5.5 years after I was on the job, was a test for captain. So I applied for that. I was one of, I think, some 25 guys that applied, and I was in the top 4 in that testing process. So I only had 6 years on the job, so I had to wait a while before I got promoted. But that was pretty difficult. I was pretty young, and I was competing against guys with 25 years in the job.
Wow.
So it wasn't, there were guys that were just hating on me, right? Because they felt I hadn't done my time yet.
Yeah. Yeah, I can imagine. I mean, these guys 25 years in, they're like, I deserve this a little bit
Right.
more, right? I mean, at the end of the day, it's the ability of that person, the knowledge of that person, and it shouldn't really matter how much time. I think people do need to do some time. This is my opinion as far as law enforcement, because we see sometimes officers become training officers, FTOs, in the first 3 years, and I don't know if I necessarily agree with that. I'm not saying that the person, isn't knowledgeable, but I think that there should be a little bit of a higher standard as far as that goes.
Yeah, experience is huge, right? Because experience is knowledge. You can learn book work, and there's guys, the fire service now, we have so many guys that are coming out that have college degrees that book work is nothing for them. They were able, they got their degrees, right? They were able, and we have other guys that were plumbers and contractors and just had to go to work as soon as they got out of high school, and night and day experience on being able to take a written exam or do an interview. So experience is huge in the fire service and public safety in general. So, I had experience from the military and being, I was a sergeant in the Army. So I had leadership experience. So a lot of that stuff, mentoring, was really easy to me. The experience of fire knowledge was something that I had to work for. It was something I didn't have.
Yeah.
So it took me years to become, confident in my own abilities.
Got it. What? How long in did you get promoted?
I became captain about 6.5 years on the job.
Wow.
So, which was young back then.
Yeah.
And it's still pretty young now. There's very, very few people that get promoted within their first 7 years.
Yeah. So what was that like, leading people who originally were kind of like you said hating on you? What? Because I would imagine that some of those people that were hating were now underneath you.
I was very fortunate. We just started a bid system, and I got up to Hilltop, and I had a 20-year firefighter and a 16-year fire engineer, and we were all a few years apart in age because I was a little older on the job. When I got hired, I was 28,
Yeah.
so I was 35 or 34 at this time, and we just got along, and they really helped me gain experience and talk to me, and they treated me as an equal versus somebody that didn't deserve it. And I was just very fortunate to have the right people around me when I got promoted. It was a blessing.
I think that makes a big difference, right? Because you could have had those guys that wanted to make it tough for you, right?
Sure.
So, as a leader, what do you feel is the most important thing to focus on?
When it comes to public safety and fire service, it's training me. You have to be prepared, right? You have to have confidence in the other two people working with you, and the mentorship and the training and the treating people, your citizens as people and not just a call, and having respect for people. All those things really, there's so many different things that carry weight. You need to be respectful to the people or the clients that you're going to or your customers, right? It's something for me that customer service has always been a big deal, but I've always thought that if you have all the right training, when it's time to do your job, it's easy, right? It's you question yourself when you're not well trained. If you're doing all the right things all the time and you're preparing when you're not working, everything else kind of falls into place.
Yeah. Did you run into anything that made you feel like it was early for you to be a leader, or did you kind of fall into it and everything just kind of fell into place?
Oh no, there were lots of incidents. I remember going to a structure fire, and we're in Hilltop. You were kind of isolated. You were kind of by yourself for a while. So me and my firefighter are in this house, and it's fully involved. We're knocking the shit out of this fire. We're kicking ass, man. And we're pumped. We get done with the fire, and it's a hoarder house. We're on top of the couch.
Wow.
For clothing and bags and stuff are 3 feet off the floor. And we're moving. They got like multiple appliances covering doorways, and we're moving things out. We knock this fire out. We send everybody home. We come back an hour later. It rekindles and the fire burns back because we didn't pull everything out of the house. So those are kind of things that, okay, as a young captain, I needed to do better in the overhaul stage, or I needed not to board it up, or there's different things like that you learn real quick when you make those mistakes. And guys don't let you forget it. Guys will call you and, we got to go back, put your fire out or whatever it is. So it was, so that hazing and that teasing helps you become a better firefighter or a better captain as well.
I caught something small right now when you were telling that story. You said, we forgot. So you were already kind of, that's a sign to me as a leader. You felt like this is my team. This is my responsibility. So I noticed you were about to say, I failed to do something, but it's really a team effort, right?
Yeah. And we all have each other's back. And that's what's great about the fire service is you build these bonds and these friendships, and everybody watches out for each other. Ultimately it's the captain's responsibility or the battalion chief's responsibility, but but when you have the right crew with you, it's all of you share that responsibility, and you all try to do the right thing, and everybody tries to make the, conscious effort of watching each other's back, right? Because at the end of the day, as a captain, my job was to make sure everybody got home safely, right? That we weren't injured, that I didn't put anybody in harm's way, that I did all my homework and did all my training to make sure I had the right strategy and had the right tactics to put this fire out.
Yeah. Did you ever have to deal with the loss of a coworker?
Yes. I was off duty at the time, but we lost 2 firefighters at a structure fire. I lost one of my best friends in a car fire while I was on the job. We had a guy that retired, moved up to Washington, and committed suicide. So there were several deaths through my 30 years that I know of.
How do you deal with that?
It takes a while. It really is difficult. You try to figure out why that happened. You question yourself. You question, what he could have done or they could have done differently. What you could have said to somebody to make their choice, different. There's a lot of thought that goes with that. It doesn't go away easily. Those are still things that you carry on your whole career.
I know you said you were off, but do you know the specifics of what happened during those fires?
Uh, yeah, it was one of the fires was a flat top and oh geez, it was up there. Oh, excuse me. And I can't think of the name of the community up there in unincorporated Contra Costa County there, kind of Pinole, Richmond border. And they went in, saved a life, came back, and had a what they called cold explosion, I think they called it. And the firefighters went back in when the explosion happened. Both of them passed away. 2 firefighters passed away.
Oh, man.
And that was under investigation. A lot of different things happened with that. And I don't want to get into too many details because that's still a pretty controversial
Yeah.
loss.
Yeah. It's got to be. I mean, any loss has got to be painful. When you're dealing with that. And you said one of them was your best friend.
No, my best friend, one of my best friends died later in a car accident on the Crockett Bridge there. His car lost control of his car. His car caught on fire on the bridge.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry to hear about that.
Yeah.
So, as a captain in a fire department, what do you think one of the biggest struggles that you have to deal with is?
It's personnel issues, right? I mean, it's always something with personnel. You got to make sure that people are in the right state of mind to come to work. We all have lives at home that are separate from the fire service. Sometimes people are going through divorces, the kids get sick. There's a lot of different things that we don't always know what's happening. And when somebody comes to work, it's without getting, we become very personal because we're together 24 hours a day. So there's a lot of times that we know more about each other than our families know. And if you have the right crew, you communicate well. Sometimes people are transferring through, people are on sick leave. So somebody will also come in and backfill. So you don't always know everybody's personal stuff. And you got to be able to make sure people are in the right state of mind. So dealing with personnel issues is a very important part of your day. And it starts right there to make sure everybody's ready to go to work.
Yeah, I would imagine as a leader, you're kind of everything, right? You can be a marriage counselor, family counselor. You're really having to be keep your guys in a state of mind that's going to keep you guys safe, right? Because when you have things going on in the back of your head, it does affect your job.
Yeah, well, it's hard to think clearly, right? If you're in the middle of a divorce and you're dealing, you're doing CPR, it's very easy for your mind to wander about something else, right? If your kid's sick at home and you go to a kid that's been shot and it's like, okay, now your head's back to that other side, right?
Yeah.
So it's very hard to stay focused sometimes when all these different issues are going through. That's why it's great to have communications with your crew. I remember, many conversations where somebody's son was screwing up and you'd hear the story of how somebody dealt with, I'm going to do this, or this is how I'm going to discipline my child, or this is how I'm not going to discipline my child. So when you have your kids, you say, hey, I remember somebody did this and that worked for them. Let me try it here. So you get to share all those things, hey, things aren't going good at home. Somebody says, hey, you need to go out to dinner, go take a vacation, go do this or that. And, make things, so these lines of communication with your crew really help make your life easier and better sometimes and give you a different way to see things. We're all born and raised with our families. And so the way we deal with issues are inbred, right? This is all we know. Well, when you work with a group of guys and you live with these guys and girls 24 hours a day, you learn different perspectives, different ways to do things. And it really is a benefit to your life.
Yeah, I agree. Now, I know we did mention your son is a firefighter. But I did want to talk about, if you're okay with talking about your daughter, and she's really the toughest one here. I think everything she had to deal with. Do you mind talking about that a little bit?
No, we were, my daughter was in 7th grade. She was very athletic. She was a black belt in karate. She played softball. She was trying out for basketball in middle school and fell and got a back pain. No big deal. Went away. A month later, came back, went to the doctor. Doctor said, no, it's just, she fell and bruised herself. Don't worry about it. A month later, it came back again. And my wife told me, hey, make sure you get an x-ray. Something's going on. It shouldn't come back every month. And so I talked to her pediatrician. She goes, you know what? Let me send you up with an orthopedic. We went to an orthopedic the next day. She goes, where's the x-ray? I said, well, we haven't had one. She goes, well, go in that room, do an x-ray, and we're going to do an MRI. And about 3 days later, I was at a DOA. I was at work at a DOA, and I get a phone call from the doctor, and doesn't identify himself or anything. He goes, is this Mr. Vargas? Yeah. Yes. He goes, hey, your daughter has lymphoma. You need to take her to Children's Hospital. It's like, excuse me? And it was like, who is this? And he goes, oh, this is, Dr. So-and-so. And we're just getting the MRI results, and we think she has leukemia. I said, well, no, we think it's leukemia. He goes, we can't get a hold of your wife. You need to get your daughter and go to Children's Hospital. So, and I never answer the call when I'm at another call or answer the phone, but we were waiting for PD. It was a DOA, natural causes. So we were kind of just in this limbo state. So the police officer comes and, takes charge of the body, and we were able to leave. I call my wife, and she says, yeah, I just got the message. I'm picking up Grace, and we're headed to Children's Hospital. You need to go get a copy of the MRI at the doctor's office. So luckily they were able to send it to another doctor in Oakland. I picked up the disc. We met at Children's at the same time. And, we're sitting in this room, and the doctor comes in and says, we looking at this MRI, we think your daughter has cancer. And it's like, oh, wait a second, where does this come from? She goes, we don't know, but we see a growth on her spine, and we're concerned that it's cancerous. And we're trying, my daughter's 7th grade, was it 11, 12 years old, something like that. And so we keep going in and out of the room. And finally, me and my wife tell the doctors, she knows what's going on. She knows that something's going on. This isn't fair. Let's go inside and we'll talk to her. And we discussed it with her. And they said, hey, if you spend the night, we can do some tests versus you having to come back and get authorized by the insurance. And so we ended up spending the night. And then, not known to us, they took us right up to the cancer ward. So we get up there, and there's all these little kids that are, it's Oakland Children's, that are bald, and the reality of the moment really came to us, and it was really, really stressful, And they diagnosed it. They went in and did surgery. They were able to get most of it out on the first surgery. We went through a bunch of, chemo, and it took like 9 months for us to kind of go through that whole process. So I was off work. Guys that worked backfield for me. I couldn't tell you the support that I got from the fire service was just incredible.
Yeah, wow. So through this time, what was the process like for her dealing with that?
It was tough. It was, we went in there, and they had to put a port in her so they can access her, easier access for IVs and stuff like that. And she just fought through it. I remember that there was days that she couldn't even walk. Her feet hurt her so bad. She had one of her surgeries, and she had multiple, I don't want to know if you want procedures, I guess you'd call them, where they had to go and do different things. And she came out of one, and she was dying of starvation, right? And I got her a jelly donut, and she wasn't supposed to eat for like 30 minutes after the procedure. I said, I got this donut. We got like 15 more minutes, and you can have this donut. And she goes, I just want a bite. Let me have this bite. So, all right, I'll let you have one bite. And she inhaled the whole jelly donut. And she goes, I feel so beautiful. And she had jelly all over her face, and it was just, awesome. And she doesn't recall any of that. Her, you go back now, and you ask her about those moments, and she can hardly recall. But I remember her just being such a fighter through all of that. Yeah. And smile on her face. We played card games. She was awesome. The firehouse would come and visit. We'd had guys in a fire engine come and visit her. And it was just as difficult as it was. I don't know if I could have not made it through that, or could have made it through that without my fire family. Yeah. They did a bunch of guys a bunch of wives and firefighters men and women shaved their heads and did a bunch of things to help support her. And it was,
That was on Fox News.
yeah,
I remember seeing that.
it was very, I mean, the support was just incredible. It was, I couldn't, the people that supported our family, there were so many of them. I just couldn't say thank you enough to them.
And she's less than 10 years old, right? You said?
Yeah, she was about 11, I think, 11 or 12.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay. Still, I mean,
Yeah.
for an adult to go through something like that is difficult, right?
Yeah.
I mean, to have a kid be so strong and to fight through that it says something, definitely. How's she doing now?
She's cancer free, so she's doing good. She's going to JC. She graduated high school last year, and she's enjoying her life. So she's doing really well.
Man, that's amazing.
Yeah,
That's great.
it is.
Blessed. So, going back to work, I mean, does that create a stronger bond with you and your guys at work, just knowing the kind of support that they gave you and your family during that time?
Oh yeah, I was very fortunate to build relationships early. I'm a relationship person, so for me, relationships are important with the people I work with, and I feel that I'm pretty connected when I was working to everybody working there with us. You know what I mean? So I felt, I cared about their families. They cared about my family. It was a great department to work for and a great bunch of firefighters. It was really, I was very blessed to have the job that I had in Richmond.
Yeah. So towards the end of your career, what was that like, knowing that you were coming close to retirement?
It was a trip. It was my last couple of years. We have a station bid system, so I was able to move to a slower station, and I was up, by the reservoir in De Anza High School, El Sobrani border, the last couple of years. And it was funny, as we had other academies coming in, we'd have a young firefighter come through. I could feel myself being the crotchety old guy. You know what I mean? I could feel my patience starting to leave, and because it was just for me, when I came on, you could yell at somebody and it would be okay, and feelings weren't hurt. As I got farther and farther in the fire service, or towards the end of my career, people were a little more sensitive there, because there was no longer the hazing. There was no longer the practical jokes. There was so much overtime. Everybody was being overworked. Patience was really, not everybody had a lot of patience. So it was just a different type of fire service than when I first came on. So I was still the crotchety old guy, and I still was more vocal than I should be a lot of the time.
Yeah.
But because I had that seniority and the respect of
You earned it.
most of the firefighters, that nobody gave me any shit for it, right?
Yeah.
They just kind of dealt with it. And it was a good time for me to go.
Yeah. And your son, being a firefighter now, is that something that you helped him along with, like to get him ready for that?
Well, and that was kind of a trip. We never really talked about it. He, when he graduated high school, he wanted to get out of town, and he asked, "Hey, can I go to EMT school?" And I'm thought, EMT school? Pff, you've never showed any, desire to be a firefighter. Why would you want to do that? He goes, "Well, I'm going to go to Arizona. I want to be able to get a job." And I've kind of been thinking about that. And I said, "Well, okay." So we sent him to EMT school, and he excelled. He, finished a 10-day program in the high 90s.
Wow.
Which blew me and his mother away. And then he got to Arizona and said, "Well, I want to go to paramedic school," and it was an accelerated program. It's like, really? He goes, "Yeah, I'm over here at Mesa JC, and I took a fire science class, and now I want to be a paramedic, and I want to have a career in the fire service." It's like, all right, well, hey, let's go. And he excelled in paramedic school and really enjoyed being a medic. And it took him several years and several different attempts through departments and stuff, and he found his place in National City. So
That's got to be a proud moment for you, knowing that your son wants to follow in your footsteps.
yeah, it was. It was a very proud moment to see him graduate the academy and see his, the people that he was working with that were, he found a good home.
Yeah. So it's a funny running joke here in my house. I tell my son, there's no way he's going to be a police officer. He's going to be a firefighter, if anything. But that's awesome that he's able to do that. Where can you tell us where he's at now?
He's National City.
National City. Okay. Busy city also?
Yeah. Busy city. Is close to the border, south of San Diego, and borders San Diego and Chula Vista. So it's right in the middle.
Got it.
Probably 10 miles from the Mexican border.
Okay. Now, one thing we didn't really touch on that's a huge thing for, I know, for first responders in general, definitely law enforcement, firefighters, is the support that we get from our own families, right? This is a job where you're not going to be able to have a successful career without that support. So, what was it like with your wife and the support that you received from her during the time that you were in firefighting?
Well, yeah, you couldn't have a success. I'm very, very blessed. We're having our 35th wedding anniversary in April. And
Nice.
you really need a strong, independent woman. You need somebody that can take care of business when you're there. There's times I was gone 6, 7, 8, 9 days when the kids were sick or the kids had school or projects or anything else. And, if you didn't have if you don't have a support group and a wife that can take care of those things, she was very independent. She had a career, she was very blessed to have the wife that I have. Couldn't have done this career and couldn't have accomplished what we accomplished by myself. For sure, it takes two of us.
But having that support is what makes it easier for us. I have a good support system. My wife, and she's out there, like, she can't wait for me to come home and tell her what happened at my job. During the day. Was that kind of the situation with you?
It was like that when I first got hired. I would come home and share all my experiences. But when I first got hired, I was going to a lot of shootings. We were going to a lot of fires. I can see her concern growing really quickly. So after about a year, I really cut down on what we were doing every day and kept more of the calls that were lighthearted versus what we were actually doing. So she wouldn't have to stress about that stuff while I was at work, and she can deal with with the family. Later on, when my son was born, years after that, my daughter was born. So she was able to stay focused and and take care of what needed to be taken care of. She was the plumber. She was the nurse. She was the one when my dog caught a possum and brought it to the back porch. Had to kill the possum because the possum was still alive.
Oh, jeez.
She had to do everything. She was awesome.
Yeah.
You know,
Wow.
she is
Now,
awesome. I shouldn't say was.
she was.
She's still around.
She's listening. So before we kind of close up, I did want to touch on. Did you or your company or your guys ever get sent out to those big fires like the Oakland fires and the Contra Costa?
I was lucky. We had a rotation system, so I did a lot of the local fires where I would get sent out, and we'd stay within the county and bounce from city to city chasing grass fires. I never had to go on any of the large campaign fires. I remember when the Oakland Hills fire happened, I was off duty and lived in Alameda, and I could look up at the hills and see the fire. And I called into the battalion chief, "Hey, I'm off duty. You need me to come in? I know we're sending people up there." And it was so overwhelming. They says, "Hey, just come in. You're going to backfill at the station." And they had already sent several crews out to go up to the Oakland Hills.
Wow.
Um, you know, yeah, and I didn't have to go on any of the large campaign fires. I was pretty fortunate that way.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it sounds like you had an amazing career, and you were blessed to be around, the right people during your career at work and outside of work. And you, you've had to deal with a lot of stuff, a near-death experience with you, dealing with your daughter, illness. I'm glad she's doing amazing now. Is there anything else that you want to touch on before we finish up?
No, you talk about calls, and it's funny because you try to forget a lot of those calls, but I remember one call in particular. We had to go to a neighboring city, and there was a car on fire in the garage, and they sent us back to cover the fire station. We get to the firehouse, and they said, "Oh, you need to come back to the fire." And we get back to the fire, and the fire's burning through the whole house. So they sent us into the attic. Me and my firefighter, who was a heavy weight lifter, squats, and just shoulders, like just tremendous guy. So we got to get into this attic space, and he's got to crawl in there. And we got this inch and 3/4 line, and we're putting the attic out, and the line gets shut off on us. And so we come bailing out, coming down the skinny little attic ladder, face first, just crawling down the attic. And we come out, and everybody's on break drinking Gatorades. They totally forgot we were inside the house fighting the fire.
Oh man.
It was amazing. It was like, oh.
Well, luckily you made it out of that.
Yeah,
It sounds like you had a bunch of those near, like, close calls, right?
yeah. I mean, yeah, 31 years. You go to a lot of structure fires. You know, way back in the 90s, there were a lot more fires than there are now. Fire prevention has really helped. You know, education, you know, and schools, all the different things that have really helped. And there's a lot less fires. Richmond still burns pretty good, but not like it did in the 90s, right?
Yeah. So one thing we mentioned earlier was, finding levity in situations and stuff that we deal with. And, it's funny because I think about it as a firefighter. I think it's a amazing job, amazing career, and I have a lot of respect for you guys. I deal with you guys on a regular basis. And one thing I always say is, I'd rather run towards gunfire than running into an actual fire. I can't imagine doing that. So I want to thank you personally for your service. 31 years, man, that's a amazing career. I hope to have a similar outcome, a healthy career where I can retire and be happy and do the things that I love to do. And I hope you're doing the same.
Yeah, I am. It was a career I would do all over again. It provided a great life for me and my family. I've built friendships that I will have forever, and I made a lot of bad choices in my life, but that's one of the better choices, other than marrying my wife and having the support that I had to get through this. That was one of my better choices in life.
Wow. Well, again, thank you for coming. Thank you for your service, and we appreciate everything that you've done.
Well, thank you, and thank you for having me.
There's a Bible verse I think about sometimes. It goes, "Then I heard the voice of the Lord saying, 'Whom shall I send? And who will go for us?' And I said, 'Here am I. Send me.'"